Welcome to the March 22nd Planetary Annihilation update. I'm here with Kevin, my partner in crime, and we're actually going to do a couple segments today. The first segment is going to be concentrated on rendering planet tech, and the second segment is going to be about navigation. I know everyone's wants to see gameplay. I don't think it's quite ready for that, but it should be ready soon, I would say. But I think what we have here is going to be fairly interesting to people. So a couple things I want to talk about first that aren't related to that stuff. First thing is Uber had its 5-year anniversary this week. So that's pretty amazing. Seems like it's flown by. But 5 years since incorporation. We didn't really get started until August or so of 2008, but wow, it's been an amazing 5 years. The second thing I wanted to talk about was we're going to be making some announcements soon for mod authors. I was kind of hoping to have that ready to go today, but it's not quite ready. But expect a blog post and some other information on kind of our official modding program. So for those of you waiting for that, that's going to be coming soon, and I think that's going to be a pretty big announcement. So let's play around with the planet editor a bit here. I want to show you guys the kind of current state of the planets and kind of talk about where we've been and where we're going. I think the big caveat here is that all the stuff that we're going to show you guys, I know I always harp on this, is not finished. You're getting to see stuff in the middle of development. It's, you know, normally we wouldn't release screenshots of stuff like this. We're just showing it to you raw, current state of development. So, you know, that's unique and special. So I hope everybody appreciates that. So let's get this up on the screen. It's up. Okay, so you guys have seen this planet editor before. This UI here has not been revised since then, even though there's been a lot of changes to the system. We're going to actually do a new UI for it pretty soon. But I wanted to kind of show you what it was capable of and where it is right now. So what you're seeing here that I'm kind of rotating around is what I call the biome view. So anybody who's played Minecraft is probably familiar with the concept of a biome. So each of these little squares effectively represents a different biome area on the planet. This is actually a fairly small planet. You can see over here on the radius, I can kind of crank this thing up, right? And you'll notice if you look at some of the knobs here, we can see things like water height, biome scale, temperature, that we've got a kind of a desert thing going on here. So if I turn this temperature down more towards the middle, we get a planet that has got more green on it, some polar caps. The dark stuff here is the mountain biome. The stuff that's kind of yellowish near the water is the kind of jungle, tropical sand kind of biome. The green stuff is grassland and forest land. And of course I can crank the temperature down even more, get more of an ice planet, more ice and rock. The number of planets that we can generate with this is pretty ridiculous. As a matter of fact, what you're seeing here is basically one seed. I'm just playing around with a single seed and playing with the different knobs. So, you know, yeah, this looks kind of interesting, but it's not graphically very interesting. Great, crash.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Development.
Yeah. Just in case anyone didn't believe us when we said this is in development, it's in development.
So you know you can really play around with this, and some of these knobs do kind of interesting things. And apparently this thing just wants to crash. Of course, live TV doesn't crash and then just starts crashing. Then whatever.
Yeah, very stable all day.
Luckily, it reruns pretty quick. So the biome scale stuff is kind of cool because you'll notice here there's very little in the way of mountain, whereas if I crank it the other direction, you get a lot more mountain. So you can kind of control the scale between where it considers the beginning of mountain and grassland and all that kind of stuff. So let's set this to kind of like more normal guy. Oh, and the height range is pretty cool too. Ability to get things to make more lumpy. And a lot of the ranges and knobs in here, when we redo the UI, we're gonna change them to be have some different ranges to them. So, okay, so this is the biome generator. It's kind of interesting. It shows you what the biome is. And the idea is that when you're sitting there creating a planet, if you want to kind of see roughly what you're going to get, you use this mode. But this isn't really how the planet's supposed to look. So let's actually generate a more realistic planet out of that biome information. And the planet generation takes a bit longer. So you can see here, now we've got some actual detail on the surface in the different biomes. We've got some trees and some props. The texturing is much more interesting. There's a giant crater here. We put this in because we wanted to kind of show you, how you could destroy a planet. And is that the only crater?
Has your water filling tech in there.
Right. So because this crater was created as part of the planetary generation process, the water has basically flowed into it. But we can also do this. Make a different planet.
Yeah. With
different craters.
Make it drier.
Well, I made it less dry there.
Yeah. Okay.
Or what I did there is I just tweaked the temperature a bit. So one of the there's a double crater. That's pretty cool. So one of the interesting things that we've been doing with the planet tech is trying to figure out how to texture it. And I've talked about the kind of virtual texturing stuff before, and this is it actually working. Now remember, this we don't consider this to be done by any stretch. A lot of the stuff here is actually still what I would call fairly kind of early, but you can kind of see the potential here. So the virtual texturing allows us to basically cover the surface with these decals. Or is it decals?
Decals, yeah.
Shit. Decals, I mean. So when you zoom in, you get, you just continue to get detail, and we can actually get fairly detailed, and we have unique texturing on the entire surface of the planet here. So as you go around, right, you can kind of see the level of detail, and then you zoom out. Now keep in mind, this is actually still a fairly small planet.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, why don't you explain a little bit about how the virtual texturing is and what it is, and kind of, because I did the initial, I'm going to say initial implementation, but really you did almost all of the real implementation. I kind of had the beginnings of it there.
Yeah, you kind of laid down the framework and then I filled it in. But like you said with Minecraft is actually a really good example where if you have a whole bunch of grass down, then it has this repeating texture on it that kind of looks like carpet. And that's basically because then you can repeat the same data over and over again. What we're doing here is basically saying, okay, we're going to put down a map for the entire planet, and then for each square of it that is visible on screen, we'll do kind of an offline process to fill it in with unique data so that it's procedurally generated but not repeating. And then we can put down, under specific circumstances, put down more interesting large decals. But right now, it's mostly just this one decal per biome that we're putting down. All the tech is there to put an arbitrary number of them, and then it just layers them one on top of the other.
Now, to me, the virtual texturing stuff is cool because we're going to be able to do, scorch marks, and we're going to be able to do, anything we want, like skirts underneath things, footprints, all kinds of different interesting details built into the texturing.
Right.
The other aspect of this kind of planet generator that we've talked about before, and if you go to my blog, I explain how this works, mavorsrants.com. And by the way, you should follow me on Twitter too. I need more followers, @jmavor. And I don't know, do you have Twitter?
I have Twitter.
What is it?
@pinbender.
And Pinbender, there you go.
Yeah.
So the other cool thing is these giant craters. You can see how these were carved out of the surface. And if you look at the detail here, it actually can just carve stuff out, right? Just take mountains and disintegrate them and stuff. So that's an example of what smashing asteroids in is going to be able to do. Now in the final game, these will probably be sized based on how big a thing you hit it with. And then the other thing we're going to do is when you get deeper, we're going to start having the lava bubble up. We haven't done that part yet. Yeah. But that's going to look pretty cool. But I just wanted to show you guys what a planet could look like with the chunk taken out.
People are asking about the swirls. Do you have a mountain biome you can show them? Because the swirls are back in there.
Well, these swirls aren't of the same size.
They're not as big as the other swirls, but they're
yeah,
coming back a little bit.
There's definitely some amount of swirl in there. Actually, that brings up a good point. Let me close this out. I want to show this. So at the top here, we've got a screenshot from the original pitch video on Kickstarter. And the bottom is a screenshot from the engine right now. So you can see that we were heavily guided by that. I mean, I really tried to design this whole system to basically emulate what Steve had created for the video and artistically try to do that. So, we talk about, maybe the swirls were a little exaggerated in the original video. Here we're getting more natural kind of noise-based swirls, and we're going to do probably some more stuff with decals. To make that work. But I just had Steve throw this together, these two shots, just to kind of show the direction that we've been going. So, I'd say the game, it looks a little bit more, or it looks a little bit less cartoony than maybe the video did, but it's still kind of painterly kind of look, just because of the way
We're really not going for realistic style. We're going for more interesting style, like kind of a little whimsical, but not like fairies or anything like that.
I want to talk a little bit more about the CSG stuff, because I think it's kind of interesting. Cool. I mean, normally when people say, "Hey, we're going to do CSG," people run away screaming, and I'm no exception, because it's very difficult to get this stuff to work consistently 100% of the time. Like, there's still times when a polygon may be missing or something along those lines. But I think we have a pretty good handle on it at this point. Right. So you can see there's shadows, right? I mean, things are coming along. I don't know. I like that. Big giant craters. So anyway, this is the current state of this. So rendering wise, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the lighting engine, because what they're seeing here, you're basically seeing conceptually a sunlight here. Yeah. And as anybody knows, when you have sun, and this planet isn't the best example, but when you have sun, you tend to have a dark side, and you can see our dark side isn't terribly dark right now. We may make it darker, and there's some neat lighting techniques going on in here, like we have a radial ambient. Yeah,
we decided that the usual hemispherical ambient contribution doesn't work, because it's the type of thing that you would see in like corridor shooters and stuff like that. Pretty much every game that's out there, because you're kind of dealing with this flat world, so everything ends up being darker on the bottom and lighter on the top, to kind of prevent the shadowed areas from looking flat.
Right. So one of the things that we looked at is I want to do HDR, which we haven't done yet, on the backside. But an even better idea was, hey, how can we actually light up the units on the backside? So what we've done is we've created let's make a real planet. We've basically created a lighting engine that is deferred, which is fairly commonplace at this point. Yeah. And so this is a demo of a bunch of lights, and these are point lights. We can actually do cooler things like headlights and shaped lights and stuff like that. So the current idea is that when the units get onto the dark side of the planet, that they all have lights on them and they all light up, and that's kind of what the game looks like. As night falls, things start coming on. There's not really any reason at this point why that can't work. We have lights on units right now, and it seems to work. So that's going to be probably pretty close to a first for an RTS game to have a day-night cycle like that's affected by that.
I've seen it,
yeah. So this technology, I mean, when you explain how it works, I mean, it's fairly understandable.
Yeah. So usually the thing is that when you're drawing a light, you have to make another pass on your scene. So if you say like the directional light, you say draw the planet so that it has a flat ambient background, and then draw the planet again so that you add in the contribution from whatever light you have. So every time you end up drawing another light, it draws the entire screen all over again and then adds them together. In the case of a deferred lighting pipeline, instead it says take a whole bunch of information from the scene and kind of store that off. And then wherever the light is going to overlap on screen with whatever's in the scene, you just light up that little tiny area. It kind of separates the two parts of the rendering equation. And then that means that you can have a whole bunch of really small lights, and it's cheap, instead of being really expensive and drawing everything all over again.
One thing we didn't mention is that the actual planetary material pipeline, we're not really exploiting it heavily yet.
Yeah.
And we actually have got, there's 3 layers. There's basically a diffuse layer, a normal map layer, and a material layer for every pixel on the planet. It's it's like triple virtual texture, basically.
Yeah.
And you can actually see some of the normal mapping.
Yeah, you can see all
in
of
here.
these lights, like all the bump mapping and everything is all correct for each one of these lights that are zooming by.
And then, of course, you've got,
Yeah. Decide, well, hey, it looks like a disco. Gotta have the disco beat.
so having the sunlight basically flicker. I don't know, I guess maybe if it was a pulsar or something, you could play like this. Might drive you insane, though.
Yeah.
So let's take some questions on this aspect of stuff.
Let's see, there was one question, are the plants proper 3D objects? And actually the trees are in this particular shot.
Everything is. Oh, the plants.
Yeah.
So there's actually 2 kind of sets of plants, right? There's the actual features that you can reclaim, and then there's the underlying any decals that we put underneath them.
Yeah, and right now the decals have like a leaf texture on them, but that may change. But the actual little pine trees, those are all actual trees.
Can terrain be deformed by weapons fire? That's kind of the idea. I mean, I don't think normal little pew-pew shooters are going to affect the terrain, but for when something that comes in that wants to actually make a crater, yeah, that's the idea. Will planet generation include reclaimable settings? I'm not even sure what that question means.
I don't know either.
It's a good question. If you're talking about like how much stuff is there on the planet, well, how much stuff is there to reclaim on the planet, then the answer is sort of. It depends on the biomes that you do. Do we have this on the screen, Andrew?
Yep.
So this is a little bit of a bigger planet. It's hard to tell scale right now, but you can see those craters are the same size that they were on the other planets. So yeah, this is a pretty big play surface.
Yeah. One of the questions that I've seen in here, and it seems to be coming up a lot, is this going to melt my computer? Basically, no. So adding the extra lighting stuff is not going to increase our minimum requirements because we have detail levels. We can basically say, okay, don't draw the shadows, don't draw the headlights. Like, we're going to have plenty of tricks to make it so that that if you have a low-end machine, that you can still make it run fast. And if you have a high-end machine, you can make it look pretty. And if you have a medium machine, then you can make it run decently with kind of the range settings. We really want to have a full range of taking advantage of the fast hardware and still looking good on the low-end hardware.
So one of the questions I saw was, deferred lighting makes it difficult to do transparent stuff. Are you going to have transparent stuff?
Well, there's transparent stuff on there right now. So
yes, it does make it trickier.
It does make it trickier. We right now, with our requirements, we're thinking that that we're not going to need any more than a forward rendering pass after the deferred rendering pass for whoever ended up asking that question, because they obviously know what a deferred renderer is. But if it turns out that we have a lot of transparency and it's overlapping and the forward pass on that is going to be a problem, then we can do it into a deferred buffer and use something like an inferred lighting technique. It's a lot easier to reorganize that behind the scenes later if we find out that our direction is not getting quite what we want out of it.
So somebody was saying something about the grass will look different on everyone's computer, so will the trees be in the same place or something? And I have no idea where he got the grass looking different on everyone's computer. Other than being a lower resolution, stuff will be...
It might be lower detail, but it's
yeah, it won't be significantly different. You're still going to have your trees, the same amount of trees and everything.
Yeah.
And yes, you will be able to completely destroy planets. In fact...
Here, you're going to show that one picture.
There's a couple of interesting photos or screenshots in here that Steve took. So this is actually a smaller planet that has had multiple things basically smack into it and really beaten the hell out of it. I'm not sure that something like this will necessarily show up in the game, but
yeah, your planet might be somewhat defunct after it gets hit with a asteroid or two,
but I thought I'd run through a couple of these different shots that Steve put together. So pretty interesting stuff in there. So. Would be nice to have planets with total darkness all around. Will those be in the game without nearby sun? I don't think that's likely because, well, I don't know. I mean, I hadn't really considered having a planet with no sun. I mean, it would technically work.
Yeah, it would work. Everything would just be black. I mean,
I suppose we could just give them control of the sunlight in the system and
like make it so that you can turn up the ambient so you can see something at least.
Yeah. Will downloading map info demand tons of bandwidth? Define tons of bandwidth. I mean, no, not really.
I mean, like those, the sliders that you see there is most of what's going to define what a planet is. So.
Well, we'll probably generate the planet on the server and send down the list of stuff that needs to be put together to do it. Right. We're not sending the seed because it's multi-threaded, so it doesn't come out the same.
Yeah.
Multi-threading is a pain that way, but it's also awesome because we can max out all the CPUs of these machines.
Yeah, but if we did end up having to send down like, what is that, a couple of megs of data like compressed, it compresses really well for being sent over. So
somebody asked a question about the camera, how we're going to handle the camera. So first of all, one thing I want to emphasize is the camera that's in this app is not the game camera.
Yeah, this is the non-game camera.
And the idea for the game camera is basically it's similar to Google Earth with kind of a strategic zoom type thing, but we're kind of trying to orient the poles. In Google Earth, you can flip stuff upside down and get all confused, and we don't think that's necessarily the best idea. So, see, there's a crack.
Yeah. One question I did see is any chance of GPU under the covers, and that's kind of a funny question. Because GPU means a lot of different things. So we're not planning on using any. We're not planning on using the GPU for doing physics, for example, because we don't really have that kind of physics in the game.
Not to mention that takes place on the server anyway.
Yeah,
and the server probably doesn't have a GPU.
It would basically only be for anything. Like if we did have something, it would be for stuff that doesn't make any difference, like particle systems and stuff like that.
Right.
There's nothing that would prevent us from using like compute shaders or OpenCL or CUDA or any of that stuff, but basically we're going from the perspective of making sure that the gameplay is good first, making sure that it looks good and runs fast, and then if GPU is something that we end up using in order to make that work, then all that much the better. Physics is like an engine that would do that, for example.
So somebody else's question, will there be handmade planets or are there only random planets? So there's nothing in here actually that prevents hand editing of planets. I'm not planning on building the UI to do that, but since we're shipping our UI system and the hooks to do that, theoretically somebody could build an editor on top of it. Or you could just build an editor separately and have it write out the JSON blobs that represent the planet. So I fully expect hand editing of planets to be a thing. Not only can you hand edit the planets, there's facilities in there where you could basically pass in things that you model. You could pretty much just model a planet if you wanted, and you could get that into the game. So I expect to see some really interesting stuff come out of that.
Yeah, I guess you could have like one big feature that's just blop.
You could have you could just model the whole planet and just say it's a base brush, right?
Yeah.
Done. So I think there's some pretty interesting stuff that can happen there. Anyway, we've talked about rendering a little bit, and I want to move on to nav, unless there's anything else you want to say about rendering.
No, I think that showed off the stuff. So.
All right, so I'm going to switch over to where you are, and come on in here. All right, thanks, Kevin. So Elijah is here. He's been introduced before in previous live streams. He's the guy that's working on all the navigation stuff. And so what navigation stuff is like pathfinding, unit movement, formations, how units move together. And kind of what we're going to show you here is the underlying technology that we've been working on that is in the game, but we're going to show it to you in our test app. And this technology is basically what allows us to put a lot of units in the game, like way more units than we used to be able to do. And algorithmically, these algorithms they're fairly new in the last 6 years or so, we didn't really have this technology on some of the previous games that I've worked on, and these really solve some key problems in making large-scale games. So Elijah's here to educate us on some of the kind of sophisticated stuff that he's done, and also, how do we apply this to planets? Because that's the challenge, right? I mean, you have a lot of experience. I call you the world's foremost expert in flow fields. Probably there's someone else that knows as much, but I don't think anyone's tried to do this with it.
Right.
So
yeah, let's pull it up.
And go full screen.
All right, let's go full screen. Okay, so what we're looking at right here.
Do one first.
Sorry, let's go to one. Sorry, you'll see that later. Okay, so flow fields. Think of a field of directions, like I like to think of water moving through things, but try to think of a 2D picture of arrows moving around, and that's sort of what a flow field is. And so, what I need to do, the problem I'm solving, is taking a 3D, planet, and converting that over to look up into that flow field. Now, flow field is a 2D, so I'm converting from 3D to 2D. So what I've done here, what you're looking at here, I call this debug mode a basis view. So I'm viewing what basis each 3D location is in. So think of, another way to think of it is like a cube being put onto a sphere. And that's how I go from a 3D position into a 2D position. So where you see orange, that's all a certain basis, on the 2D side of things. And so this is a quick view to see how I map from 3D to 2D. I'll go to a different mode. This mode is a sector mode. So what I do is I break up the world into what I call sectors, but basically you can think of them as areas. So each area on the 3D sphere and on these different canyons has a different color. I can just cycle through these different colors. I just pick a random color to show off the sectors. In any case, what I do when I build flow fields is I only build them for specific sectors. So I don't build flow field, like let's say you're a tank and you want to path somewhere. If you path somewhere close by, I'm probably only going to build one flow field for the sector that you're in. But if you want to path to, say, the other side of the whole planet, then I'll choose the sectors that go from where you are to where you want to go and build the flow fields that take you there. And I'll show that to you. So you can think of this as just breaking things down into smaller pieces so that the algorithm is faster. Okay, we'll move over to these are cost fields. So here I'll show you. This represents cost for, say, a land tank. So a land tank can't go up, say this cliff side right here. So that's why you're seeing red.
Yeah, red basically means effectively impassable for that particular movement type.
Right, and then the green is pathable, and I can put some. Let's say I put some cost right here.
So this cost that you're drawing in here, you're basically directly modifying the cost field. So the kinds of things that would get rendered into there is like if there was a building, right, there would be some cost, and then things would automatically flow around the building.
Right.
Just as an example.
Right. So, excuse me. You can see this green here. Think of it like it's almost like a hill. Like it's preferable to path around a hill. So if I have a tank, let's say, he would rather not go through the hill because it's more expensive for him to go up that hill.
One thing I want to point out, by the way, is the scale of your cube and the speed that it moves at is purely in this app for ease of testing. Basically, it moves quite a bit faster than stuff in the game would move.
Right. Everything you're seeing here is my personal debug view. It doesn't represent. There's a lot more going on that I'm not visualizing and I'm not showing you. Like think of every one of these blocks as like a piece of information. So like this hill, you can see a lot of different pieces of information, and that all goes into a field of a flow field. But I can play with this. I can change the size of things. These cubes, everything is, the way they move, like the way time moves here, it's way faster than in the actual game. Like here I can slow down time, or speed it up. So everything here is my playground. And so please don't look at this and think, oh, well, that's how the game is going to work. It's not. It's
this is the inside shit that nobody ever gets to see, basically.
Right.
I mean, this is like, a lot of times debug stuff like this doesn't even end up getting exposed in the final game for various reasons.
Right. Like we tend to not show this kind of stuff. We work out all of our kinks and we show you when everything is perfect. So here I'm showing you guys stuff when it's not all perfect. I'm working out the kinks of the algorithm, and I'm sharing that with you, which is pretty awesome. But I hope you have that understanding, as I show you things. Okay, so this is what I'm calling a cost field. I'll move on to one of my other views. Now this is a representation of cost. So let's say I want a path over here. You can see how where you see green, the cost is lower, and where you see the colors go to blue and then to purple, the costs are growing. So if I wanted to path, to the other side of the planet, you can see how I cycle through a lot of different colors. Let's see, where did my guy go?
He got stuck.
Where did he go?
He's right over there.
Oh yeah. So you see, look, I found a bug. Or you guys are finding it with me. So, I'm working through the algorithm and put a number of guys here. Let's have them path over to here. Anyways, you can see them going across the flow field, and depending upon where they're at, they'll flow to the same goal, but they may choose different ways to get there. That's one of the nice properties of a flow field. I can add a whole bunch of different guys, and they'll path differently depending upon where they're at, but they use the same results. So it ends up being really cheap to add a bunch of units. I can dynamically, put some costs there, and they'll respect that. So imagine, a big army that's parked, getting in the way. They'll want to, move around that area. So.
Yeah, and you'd also put in things like, if there was a forest, right, that would add some cost. So, because there's a cost to weaving all through the forest, it basically effectively extends the length, right? So
right.
there's all kinds of interesting uses for this.
Right. So you can see I'm playing with the algorithm. I'm going to have to work out some kinks, as you've seen. But this is normal, for a Pathfinder, running into kinks with lots of different geometry and then figuring them out and fixing it. You can also see how I dynamically build cost fields if one hasn't been built before and one is needed. So you can.
Now, one of the things people may not realize is, basically what you see here is one layer of cost field, right? Every different move type effectively ends up with its own set of fields and all that kind of stuff. So it actually gets complicated and expensive really quick. So that's one of the reasons for only building these things when you need them is if there's a set of units in a particular sector and it needs a cost field for that units, then it will build it. If it's not there, it doesn't cost any memory or performance or anything. So it's interesting to talk a little bit about how the actual pathfinding algorithm works, right? So the sectors that we've got, effectively what happens is you do an A* sector to sector to figure out what direction to go, and then you basically update the flow field for the sectors that you actually found that you need to go through. And there's been a couple of occasions here where because of the way the flow goes, they end up detouring through another sector, and it just builds a cost field and a flow field at the same time when that happens. So the actual pathfinding of the individual units, they just basically follow the flow and go where it says. It's actually a really elegant algorithm for solving this problem.
Yeah, it also really helps for when you're doing formations, which I haven't gotten to yet. We're looking at a lot of different things here. You saw how I can dynamically apply cost, and have that affect, how things like, look, these guys said that's too expensive. I'm going to go around, and I just threw the colors here represent a large cost. So, if you had a huge army land there or whatever we want.
So how does this make doing formations easier?
So traditionally, when you have a Pathfinder, you basically have a fixed path generally, and sometimes.
When you say a fixed path, you mean basically one single path.
Right. So you can think of breadcrumbs leading you to a goal, but you have a fixed line that goes through those set of breadcrumbs, like a roller coaster. You're stuck on a track, and game developers will tend to, if they want it for something like formations, you'll need to break off of that track because the formations need to handle a dynamic environment.
Yeah, I mean, they're basically formation is like a bunch of guys at once. So how do you pathfind for a bunch of guys at once, right?
Right. Right, and so when you have something like flow fields, you can basically you're never on a track. You can always find your goal from any location. So I can, and there's a steering pipeline, and my point is, by saying that is you can go in any direction and I can still steer you to your formation. So imagine you have a big formation and there's a big opponent that you need to get around because you're interested in getting past the opponent. You can break formation, get around that big opponent, and then it's a dynamic moving object, and then get back into formation in a way that's cost effective and it looks really good. And this is something that's not easy to do when you're dealing with a fixed set of paths. I mean, it's hard to put them in a good formation without rebuilding that path over and over and over again, which is really expensive.
I mean, from my perspective, pathfinding in unit motion is the hardest problem in this kind of game.
Right. And for an RTS game, this is a godsend. For an RTS game, this changes everything. You can't, there's gameplay that we're going to get from this that you just cannot get in other RTS games. So really, I want to push this hard. I want to take it farther. I know working with Jon, letting him know ahead of time how this works. We're thinking about this as we build the tech from the ground up. So it's a unique opportunity to take RTS to a new level, in my opinion, in terms of gameplay, and not just like, hey, we're not only on a sphere, we can have a lot more guys moving. I mean, I want to push this to something like, Lord of the Rings.
I threw the gauntlet down, right? I said 1 million units. 64 core processor, just need to do 15 or 16,000 units per core, and we'll be there. But it's a lofty goal.
Yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about some of the other movement types, because the land units is the trickiest, but we've also got air, orbital, water, subs. How does that work? I know recently you've actually been spending your time on air.
Right.
So how does air work? How does air fit into this?
So air's been interesting for me. I think if I had a flat plane like which is what I'm used to, it would be a lot easier. I've noticed that because I'm flying across a sphere, I need to care about things differently. How you turn is different. So you want to stay within the stratosphere. You don't want to go off into space. But yet you need to care about these extruding mountains and things. So air is very interesting for a game like this in terms of the 3D space. It's, mathematically speaking, there's a lot of interesting things to deal with. So I'm working those kinks out, and I look forward to showing air to you guys. I love different kinds of movement, like having an air unit shoot up into the sky and then kick on its thrusters and then take off and travel across the map to its target and then make swooping attacks, bombing runs, or if it's got VTOL, so it can like vertically take off and vertically land. I mean, there's just a lot of. I mean, when this thing starts happening, where we see land units crawling all over the planet, we see planes and jets shooting around. I mean, it's going to come alive. And you guys,
they saw the video.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm excited. I can't wait to start.
It's funny because I often get questions like a lot of people ask, are you going to do X, Y, and Z feature? Are you going to do this and that? And it's like we really look at the pitch video as what we're shooting for, right? That's the game that we're making. That's what all of this stuff is towards. Everything from how we generate the planets, the art style, how the units move, what actually happens is all basically driven off that original vision. And people come up with all kinds of ideas and stuff that would be cool, and I encourage people to create their own mods and experiment with the game. But but we're making the game that we pitched, you know. And it's funny, you know, when we first started working on the game, somebody asked me on Reddit about flow fields. They're like, "Oh, are you guys going to do flow fields?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course we're going to." Like, it's obvious to me that that's the way to do it. And you know, we hadn't even at that point talked about it or anything, right? You're the one that was like, "Hey, you know, if you want to do flow fields, I want to work on that because, you know, that's what you're passionate about from a tech perspective right now." When's the book coming out anyway?
I don't think I've ever mentioned the book other than online. So there's a book. I think it's going to be called Game AI Pro. I saw it listed on Amazon, so I believe it should be out here soon. I don't know what the publisher's thinking in terms of dates, but I'll tell you this. You know, on the cover there's a Supreme Commander unit and an article on flow fields that I wrote is in there, as well as Mike Robbins has an article in there about AI that he did for Supreme Commander. And it's pretty cool that they're using Supreme Commander as the cover of the book. To me, that tells me the articles that I wrote and Mike wrote, you know, are being highlighted. That's how I feel, I guess. You know?
Yeah, it's as I say, it's cool.
Yeah, so if you really want to know the details on what I'm doing here, I really get into the technical. If you think this is too technical, wait. Just go buy the book. It spells it out.
And just to be clear, I mean, this is like the next generation evolution of even the stuff in there. Like, that doesn't cover any of this different bases and, you know, all the kind of crazy stuff that we're doing here. You know, this is more like a 3D generalization of the algorithm. Look, somebody got the link for you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So if you're on the stream, you can see that. Yeah, so this is you won't find the 3D stuff that I'm doing right now. That's new, latest and greatest, but the 2D stuff that I did for Supreme Commander 2 is in there. So yeah, I'm excited. This is great. I love building new tech. I love doing new types of taking a genre, bringing it further, and it's also pretty awesome to share that passion with you guys online and show you deep algorithmic, you know, visualizations. I'm really into visualizing my stuff.
Let's take some questions here. I see some going by. So, can player add cost to areas where there are enemy cannons or AA guns, for example? So, cost is never directly exposed to the player. This is the underlying system stuff. Anytime cost is added, it happens automatically, effectively, is what happens, right? So, you know, when a building gets placed down or whatever, that effectively adds cost, right? Somebody else had asked, you know, can units kind of know about each other from a distance? And that's the cool thing about flow fields, right? If you take a building and you stick it somewhere and that puts cost in, that cost flows out so that you kind of do have this, you know, to misquote Einstein, spooky action at a distance where things can affect other things. To me, that's what makes this technique so powerful, is it basically generalizes the idea of a single unit needing to be able to figure out what it's doing to a group solution, right? Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's things that we can do to, you know, like I'll be looking at the game, playing it. If me and John will both be looking at it, and if we feel, hey, the guys should path this way when this happens, or that way when that happens, just know that we have a very, very versatile algorithm where we can apply cost. You know, like this is a theoretical situation. Let's say you have a big building and it's about to fall, you know, and it's going to fall over here, and we want a huge army that's there not to get squished. What if I put cost on the ground there? They'll dynamically want to move away so they don't get squished by this falling building. Now, I'm making that up, but I'm trying to explain how, you know, it really helps the AI. Really, you know, when you hear AI, you know, pathfinding go hand in hand. You want your AI to make smart decisions on how it moves around. And just know that with this algorithm, we really have a powerful way to communicate what is a costly area.
So will the flow field be able to do things like ferries, unit guns, or teleporters?
So when I teleport somebody, I don't need a flow field. I mean, they're going to just teleport there. And when it comes to unit guns,
and like a unit gun, like if you're telling, hey, this unit, go to this unit gun, and then get shot out of it, right? The flow field would be to the unit gun, and then that would do its thing, and then wherever it ended up, it would have a flow field there, right?
Right.
It's basically on the ground.
Right, and I think part of the reason that question was asked, let me be clear. This flow field that you're looking at is per goal. So I'm going to have a lot of flow fields going on during a war. For every goal, there's going to be a flow field that takes you to that goal. If you want to get technical, A-Star does a lot of work and it figures out things, but then it forgets that information. Think of a flow field as, for every goal, it just keeps that information around, because you could, in RTS games, you tend to have many units going to the same goal.
By the way, it's obvious to me from the questions that what we're talking about is like 99% of people have no fucking idea what we're talking about.
All right. Yeah,
because we're not relating it to the game. Because there's a lot of questions about things like, will artillery craters add to cost? And it's like, it's not really a decision about a crater. It's more of a decision about, in general, if you have churned up ground, does that cause units to move slower? Well, hey, if it did cause units to move slower, yes, it would add a little bit of cost to the flow field, and they would try to avoid that area. So wreckage fields, I think, are a good example of this, right? Wreckage fields will add cost, and so units will either be able to intelligently find their way through the wreckage or around the wreckage if that is actually what makes more sense. So it does actually affect the game, but again, this stuff happens behind the scenes. This is not player exposed. There's never going to be a place in the game where, what button is it to paint?
Oh, I have to hold down control.
There's never going to be a place in the game where a player does this and paints cost in, right? This is all just tricks that we use on the gameplay side to make things do what we want them to do. Just to try to make that clear. So like somebody says, can you force units through the flow field? No. The whole point of the thing is it automates stuff. You tell your units where you want them to go, and then they use this to figure out the most efficient way to get there based on what's going on in the game. So if that had been a wreckage field that he just went through, right, they'd find their way through it.
Yeah, and another thing I want to emphasize is when you see these guys turning, they have a certain turn rate. They have a certain acceleration, a certain braking setting.
See, people are just confused. Units can't go across hills, somebody says, right? And it's like, it's not a literal hill. It's a hill in cost, which is different, right? It's not like, yes, units can go over hills, but the hill we're talking about is a cost hill, not a hill. It's a redefinition of the terminology.
Right. So think of if there's no cost, think of, it's flat. It's very flat. To traverse. But as soon as you paint cost, which you see on the screen is green, imagine it becomes more costly. It's like, would you go up the stairs or would you walk straight? To get to your goal. I would prefer to walk straight. And so I use the term hill.
So yeah, exactly. So somebody else says, is there subgroups in move types like legged versus wheeled? And so there is subgroups in movement types, but it's not legs versus wheeled. It's more like hover versus land unit versus air unit versus, and also size factors into it. If you have a giant unit, it actually will use a different cost field because, just it needs a different one.
Yeah, okay, so I'm showing you, right here I'm showing you cost for a single move type. So this is cost for land tanks. A land tank cannot go up a big cliff, but let's say you had a spider bot or something that can crawl up cliffs, then you wouldn't see the red here because they can crawl up the canyons.
Right, the cost field is different for every move type. So yeah, if you have a max slope like a spider bot, you can go climb up at anything. The areas that are red here would not look red under that scenario.
Right.
So we have to generate. This is why for those of you out there that have modded games before, you'll see in the unit blueprints, you'll see different selections for like which layers things are on and which path agent type they're using and that kind of stuff, because there effectively has to be a bucketed limited number of them, because if you had a different whole set of path movement types for every single unit, your game would explode rather rapidly.
Right. So there's like 4, 5, or 6 different move types, and we can add different ones, and there's a lot of different. If you want to get into here's some technical stuff. We have the sea bottom floor. There's units that can go, and walk underwater. The commander,
for example.
Then there's submarines, so that's underwater,
but kind of flying.
Yeah, they're not on the sea floor. And then there's the water surface, like boats and things like that. And it keeps going. Then there's the land, ground. They can't go on the water, but they're just land. And then there's the stratosphere or air, air units. And then you have orbital or exosphere, where you have satellites. So there's many, many layers, and there's certain units that can travel on those layers. So if you have like a hover tank or a hover unit, it can travel on the surface of water and land. But if you have a tank, it can only stay on the land. It can't go on the water. And so there's lots of different combinations, and each unique combination will have a different flow field that will get you to your goal. Like you'll need a flow field that takes you around the lake, unless you're hover, which will take you over the lake.
So people keep asking about Supreme Commander stuff, and quite frankly, I don't feel comfortable talking about stuff from Supreme Commander 2. So quit asking about it. I didn't work on it, and that's not what we're doing here. Elijah did happen to work on it, but I think it's kind of gauche to talk about that stuff too much when it's at a different company. So please add units. So that's like an interface question. I'm seeing a lot of people really want to know gameplay stuff.
So yeah, this is more of like, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to describe to you the underlying algorithms that are going to run the game. So admittedly, you're not seeing gameplay, you're not seeing some of that stuff, but I hope you understand more of, what goes on technically to achieve, a game like Planetary Annihilation.
Unit collision was a question that's been asked a couple times about whether or not they'll push each other out of the way.
In extreme circumstances, they might.
Question.
I'm still not sure what the question is.
Will units push each other out of the way if they're just like...
Will units push... see, that's the Supreme Commander 2 question. Sorry, I'm not addressing Supreme Commander 2 questions.
But I can tell you technically what we can do is when a unit stops moving, I can dynamically put cost in the cost field. So in other words, it'll affect the flow field in such a way where the other units will dodge that parked unit. It won't just run into it. However, you can get congestion when there is a lot of units. Let's say, imagine Lord of the Rings, or a situation where you have 1,000 units all in a small space. How do you deal with that? In real life, people would get pushed around in a crowd. But I agree that sometimes it doesn't make sense to push people around. If you're a big unit, here's the thing, I can technically do whatever I want. I can have people push people, I can have people not push people. So I'm going to sit down with design, and design's going to look at things, we're going to make decisions. Like if you play a game like StarCraft and you have the Zerg, and you have a lot of Zerg going on, they push each other around all the time. And it kind of makes sense because they're Zerg live creatures. But let's say you have a bunch of robots, maybe this tank, it doesn't make sense for the tank to slide around. It breaks realism. I 100% agree that that we want things to look real. So I can go in there and make sure that tank does not move, for example. And that I can also put cost where that tank is dynamically so that people will go around the tank. But then let's say you have a huge robot or something that's just massively sized compared to this little tank. Can the tank be pushed aside in that case because this large guy wants to get through? I think it could be, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm going to go to design, and I'm going to go to Jon or whoever and say, hey, how do we want this to behave? What do we want the algorithms to do?
From my perspective, basically, I don't think big giant tanks and big giant mechs should be pushing each other around because it breaks the realism of the solidity of them.
Then we won't. It's that simple.
But a hover tank, right?
There you go. So a hover tank, if that visually makes sense and the solidity of it, it doesn't. I can do whatever we want. That's what I'm trying to communicate here, and I think the algorithm is more versatile, when it comes to movement than anything else. And so the fact that you may have saw pushing around in a different game doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get that with this game. It's all controllable. That's what I want to communicate.
So let's take a couple more questions and then wrap this up. Somebody's asking about naval units. Naval units basically have their own flow field. As we've been kind of saying, every layer and every movement type has to have its own flow field. So, that part's pretty simple. That's an easy question. Will eFlow be hardware accelerated at all? No. How will production work, like mining resources, etc.? Metal and energy. That one's easy. Can you transport the commander? Yes. Can big units walk over other units? If we had big units, yes, but currently we don't have any super units in the game. That's something that we've been talking about, though. Is flow field stuff mostly server side? Yes, it's all server side. All the pathfinding is server side. Have we tested the algorithms on giant planets and bigger planets than this? I don't know. Depends on what your definition of a giant is. Can you build structures in craters? Sure. There's no difference between a crater and any other piece of the terrain. It's just a mesh. We talked about using the term nav mesh, but I think we decided not to call it that. But I mean, that's effectively what it is versus being on a grid.
Right. You're seeing a nav mesh right now. So the geometry you're looking at is actual navigation geometry with a flow filled texture being splatted onto it for debug purposes. It's kind of an abstraction. It's not. I wouldn't look at this and say it's accurately, showing us what is happening. It's just an approximation to help me understand, the algorithm as we're using it.
Will asteroids use a different path system? Yes. This is for units. Asteroids are in orbit. Totally different deal. Let's see. Let's take maybe one or two. Will these algorithms in any way make units shooting other units smarter? No. Has nothing to do with shooting. It's just all about unit motion. That one looks really long. I don't know if you can see the end of it. Will air units be able to pick up tanks or other ground units and then have a unit move to their flow field? I don't know. I can't read the question. It's too long.
How are we storing a flow field data? We're storing it. It depends. I have different fields. I could describe this real quick. So the input is what I call a cost field. And that cost field you could think of as a grayscale image. It's 0 to 255, so it's an 8-bit. You could think of an 8-bit texture. So you have this grayscale input, and now I'm showing you. Here, let me go to this is the cost field right here. So I'm showing you different colors. Where you see red, I have that as 255, which is unpathable. And then as you go from 1 to 254, you have a degree of cost, and I'm showing that with a green color here. So it's pretty cheap in terms of memory size. I don't even store a cost field if the sector doesn't have anything interesting, which it looks like this planet has interesting stuff everywhere. But imagine you had a surface that was pretty flat. I wouldn't even store the cost field for that unless you dynamically added cost in that area. So that's the input. We have our cost field, and then that goes into what I call an integrator, and it builds out an integration field. An integration field, it depends. Like I'm toying with using floats versus 16-bit ints, to see if there's a quality difference between the two. But imagine it's a little bit more expensive, but it's a temporary integration field, and that is right here. I'll show that to you. So this is the integration field, and so that could be, think of a texture that's a 16-bit texture or a 32-bit texture in terms of cost. Internally, I'm doing different things, but that's a good description of the cost there. So you go from cost input, then you go to integration field. The integration field, what I store in there is, imagine a goal being 0, and then as you go away from the goal, the numbers grow. So it's like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if I run into a hill, then I'll add the cost of that hill. So the hill could be a cost of 20. So then I'll go, 5, 25. If the next is another 20, then it's 45. So imagine the integrated cost changing as it goes away from the goal. Then I take that integrated field, and the output is the flow field. In the flow field, I look at each location, and I find the cheapest integrated cost, and that's the direction. So then I store, and that can be 4 bits. So 4 bits can represent 16 directions. So a flow field is pretty cheap. And you could think of a 4-bit texture.
So somebody keeps asking how bottlenecks are going to be handled. Bottlenecks are going to be handled the same way that they work in every other game. The units have to line up and get through the bottleneck. There's like literally no other solution to that. However, the flow field makes the organization of that process make sense, right?
Right.
It's kind of hard to describe how superior it is to the breadcrumb way. But
Right.
with the breadcrumb way, you basically have to, you have all these units that are wider than your breadcrumb thing, and you have to basically figure out manually writing some code, how do I squeeze them through this gap?
Right.
Whereas the flow field will just send them in. They'll kind of like squeeze as tight as they can, and then they'll come out on the other side and reform. And they may also find, if it gets really full, that they just go around, because that's quicker than waiting for everybody to get through. It gives you local information that solves a global problem, I think is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's like trying to get sand through an hourglass,
So anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope people enjoyed seeing some of the Planet Gen stuff, some hardcore tech, which honestly, I'm starting to think we shouldn't show tech this hardcore, because I honestly don't think I think like 5 people who see this will understand this. I could be wrong, but I think it actually can confuse people, because they'll be like, oh, is this part of the game? And it's like, no. Most of what you see here is like tech stuff that, you really won't even think about when you're playing the game. It just makes stuff happen. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate everyone's support, and I hope to show you guys some actual gameplay soon. There's definitely a lot more than this to show, but I wanted to get some of the underpinnings out there and kind of show people what the process of really making a game is like. So let's wrap this up.
Some people said they love it.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.